Hi, I'm Samantha with HNTB, and I'm the NorCal and Nevada Director of Technology and Planning. And this is my first CoMotion, and it has been really wonderful, and I've had a lot of inspiration and ideas to take back home. And I'm hoping that this panel will continue to, on that trend of some inspiring and maybe thought-challenging ideas. So I'm going to do a brief introduction of my panelists and then have them talk a little bit about themselves. We have Ray Sosa, who is the Chief Officer of Planning with LA Metro. You heard from him on Tuesday in a great keynote. We also have Carrie Schindler, who is the Deputy Executive Director of San Bernardino County Transportation Authority. We have Andrew Quinn, who is the Assistant Deputy Director of Roadway Pricing for Caltrans. And then last but not least, we have Craig Hutton, who is the Associate Assistant Deputy Director of Policy for Canada Transport. Did I get that right?
Just about.
Okay.
That's good.
Close enough. So let's start with you, Ray. Just tell us a little bit about yourself, and we'll do some introductions, and then we'll get into it.
Thank you. Ray Sosa. Good to have everybody here. Nice, warm, sunny day in Los Angeles. It's a wonderful day. Just a little bit about myself. I've been in the role of Chief Planning Officer for the last couple of years, but actually it's a return role, kind of a welcoming home. I started my career at Metro as an intern and left as a senior planner, working on a number of different projects, bikeway, joint development, one of the first bus rapid transit lines, as well as a couple of rail lines. Then moved over into the private sector for about 15 years, so I've got public and private experience. And worked again on a number of projects locally, but also nationally. Really excited about the future. Born and raised in Los Angeles, was here during the first Olympics. Excited about the next Olympics, so really happy to be here. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Carrie Schindler, Deputy Executive Director for San Bernardino County Transportation Authority, or SBCTA. I've been with SBCTA for about 12 years now. I've been in the role of Chief of Fund Administration, Director of Transit and Rail, and now my current role. My background is I'm a civil engineer. I've worked on transit. That was my passion coming out of college, coming out of San Diego State, go Aztecs. And kind of meandered around and did quite a few things, including flood control, planning, construction, probably one of my most favorite things. What's interesting about SBCTA is we are the largest county in the contiguous United States. We are the size of like 5 of the states on the eastern coast. And we have urban areas to the ruralest of ruralist areas, where we basically have a city that has 5,000 people in it. And we're charged with figuring out how to plan for transportation for all of those needs, varying needs. We are the gateway to the goods movement throughout the country. Everything that comes in the port pretty much has to come through our area. And then we really do want to, and we are charged with figuring out how to balance, a community that grew up and developed around single occupancy vehicles and the need to give them another way, a quality way to move throughout the region. So I'm very happy to be here today. Thanks for having me.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Andrew Quinn, Assistant Deputy Director of Roadway Pricing at the California Department of Transportation, or Caltrans. This is actually a newly created role. It was created about 2 years ago, and I've been the first person to have the privilege to be in it. And my role is really about helping to develop and implement policies and strategies to advance equitable roadway pricing in partnership with all of the many transportation agencies like SBCTA and LA Metro across the state of California. And so I've done a lot of work around just clarifying, what are the eligible uses of toll revenues. At Caltrans and at the state of California, we obviously have very ambitious climate goals, and so we would like to see toll revenue projects committing their net excess revenues to things like increased public transit, rail, commuter rail, active transportation facilities, those kinds of things. Then we see that as an opportunity to really maximize the behavioral change that comes with pricing, right? Encouraging folks to get out of their single occupant vehicle and give them other options besides driving alone. And so at Caltrans, we have a vision for a world-class transportation system. And really what we think about and what I think about on a day-to-day basis is how do we achieve that by reducing congestion, fighting climate change, reducing emissions, improving air quality, and doing both of those things while keeping costs low for low-income and disadvantaged communities across the state. So small order, but it's a lot of fun, and I get to work with brilliant people all across the state, so it's a real privilege.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good to be with you. Craig Hutton, I'm from Transport Canada. So Transport Canada is the equivalent of DOT here in the US or the Department for Transport in the UK. So responsible at the national level for the movement of freight and passengers. And sort of related to outcomes around efficiency, the environment, safety, security. The group I manage at Transport Canada, we are responsible for putting frameworks together, whether they're modal in the air sector or rail sector or multimodal, how those modes can work together. And it really is focused on the objectives of efficiency and environment. And I have colleagues who work more on the safety security side, but we work together obviously in terms of how those objectives all come together to make a stronger transportation system overall for users, whether those are shippers or passengers. So certainly over the last number of years, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, you know, the big focus coming out of COVID was making sure that we were in a better position to manage disruptions, whether they be climate-induced, they be cyber issues, or disruptions from labor or other issues, how we can better manage the effects of disruptions and work with partners on that. Other issues, of course, decarbonization of the sector is a huge, huge priority for us in Canada. And another big priority for us as well is just working with partners around the world, including the US. Of course, we have an integrated freight and passenger system within North America, so very important. We work closely together with stakeholders, not the least of which is Department of Transport in the US, on aligning our regulatory frameworks and other frameworks so that we ensure that smooth passenger and freight flows so that producers and passengers get to where they're going anywhere within North America smoothly, seamlessly, and securely. So I'll leave it there, and happy to be here, and this is my 4th year at CoMotion, so thanks to Sam and CoMotion organizers for having me.
Great, thank you guys. So thank you for being here this afternoon, and thank you all for joining us, and I hope you enjoyed lunch, but we're going to try and get all of these very, very diverse perspectives around a specific topic today, and that's the multimodal hubs. And beyond just connecting modes, how data and technology can be used to really enhance the customer experience, which is a key factor in them really delivering on mode shift. So you heard Ray talk about this being one element, one of several elements as part of the Olympic and Paralympic Games, to be able to really have this intense 6-week influx work out. But LA Metro, as you mentioned, there's a great pedigree for you guys to be able to really meet this challenge. So I wanted to ask you about, just to talk more about how you're going to leverage those and how that's going to enhance the customer experience.
Great, thank you. I hope there are some folks who saw the World Series parade in Los Angeles the last couple of weeks. That is kind of a small representation, and I say small even though there are 250,000, 225,000 people within a 1.5-mile corridor, all in one location, screaming and yelling. I was one of those people out there. And that is a representation of what we can expect during the games, where we have a significant number of people. They say 7 Super Bowls in one day for 2 full weeks, and 2 Super Bowls each day during the Paralympics. So it is a phenomenal effort and information and data to be provided to customers who are using it to get to work, because we may have route changes, we may have delays. We may have a need to change patterns. All of that will be incredibly needed during that particular time. Over the next 3 years, we're actually, also expanding our system. So we're adding new components, major new components of the system. There will be a direct connection starting next year with the connection to the airport and the new automated people mover. And then the year after that, we will open up a segment, and the year following that for the next 3 years will be segments of the D-Line subway that will service Westwood to downtown LA. Huge investments that we've been planning. My group, the planning department, handles all of the earlier components of planning and getting approvals and getting funding for these major rail corridors. We also are responsible for the bus rapid transit system and planning those systems for LA, and a few of those will also be opening in Los Angeles. The key is the connectivity and the information when people arrive at certain stations. And we talked about that for the Olympics. What we'd like to see is that people arrive in these new stations where there may not be as much understanding and knowledge of the system from even the local customers, because they just open. We need to be able to provide information in some of the basic ways, including very clear, easily to understand and readable maps and directions and how long it takes you to get to someplace, but also what other modes you can access from that particular point. And we're hoping during that time you'll be able to access all of that with your app that will have real-time information on the next bus arriving at your location, or the number of bikes, electric bikes that might be available for you to use. And that we look beyond the station to look at the streets that connect to that station in a complete and holistic way, so we can move more people through, not just autos, especially as we think for the Olympics as a transit-first games. So we're excited about that opportunity.
Yeah, that will be really interesting, especially with the app being probably in multiple languages and things like that too. On Tuesday, you got a question about this, and I wanted to follow up with it, that in addition to moving people, there's also a lot of goods movement. And so there has to be this kind of threading of the needle, I assume. So I'm curious, what kind of partnerships is LA Metro looking at to kind of put all those pieces together?
Well, there are definitely a lot of partnerships. We're partnering with Caltrans, partnering with Metrolink, partnering with the local cities in defining the different roles during the games. And the freight companies are also a component, because we still need to do the day-to-day business of not only Southern California, but for the nation in terms of moving some of those goods. We'll start to build off what we did in the '84 Olympics, which is to coordinate the timing of when goods can be moved. Some of the events may cross certain freight corridors that are highly utilized, or some of the freight corridors may cross arterials that may be the place where we direct people. That information of when that happens and the communication of that to the local community will be really, really important. We're in those conversations now.
So not just the importance of partnerships, but I heard in there, that kind of travel demand management, surge management, and the partnerships that are really within this region. I wanted to pivot to Craig, because as more of the national role, how does that scale and look differently for, say, airports and other, putting all those pieces together with several partners, private and public?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And at the national level, recognizing that each jurisdiction has a particular role to play, how you assemble those partnerships is important. And the stakeholders you might identify as being important in bringing into the conversation, I think, has changed over time as well. So I think in the transportation space, I've been with the department since 2006 and seen quite a few changes in terms of how we engage, and partnerships have evolved. Stakeholders that we wouldn't have considered in the past speaking to, because perhaps they weren't direct transportation service providers, but now include those innovating in the transportation space, technology providers, or with a user-centric approach, making sure the accessibility community is in the room, or making sure that in Canada the reconciliation agenda with First Nations is important, so that our First Nation partners are also with us, and so that applies that kind of equity lens as well. So the nature of partnerships has changed over time, and the responsibility is to make sure you're constructing the right conversations to get to where you're wanting to go. And for us, I think where I really first saw this landing in a way that was quite meaningful was around Car of the Future and us developing a policy framework around connected automated vehicles, and to look at what did we want those vehicles to achieve, and making sure we were incorporating the perspectives at the table. So of course OEMs, Google, having the Canadian National Institute for the Blind at the table, having labor represented at the table, social equity experts, so that we could all have a conversation about what are the objectives that these vehicles could achieve in the future. What should we be thinking about from the get-go rather than scrambling later and realizing we've got a blind spot? So I think that was my first kind of experience with assembling partnerships at a national way on a very specific topic, but that was quite different from what we did in the past. But I also think partnerships are incredibly important to pool resources so that you're knowing how to allocate, who's playing what role, particularly as you recover from disruption. So, for example, in Vancouver, lower BC mainland, you might recall the atmospheric river in 2021 in November. So it was this time of year, 134 millimeters of rain falling, blowing up the record previously of 34 millimeters of rain. It severed major roadways, it severed railways. And so $1 out of every 3 of Canada's overseas trade goes through the Port of Vancouver. And so our trade movements suddenly were stopped. And so working based on relationships that had already been developed and strengthened previous to that event happening, but bringing those partnerships together quickly to then identify who's best placed to do what. So executing, and then knowing for us, for example, at the federal level, where maybe we could provide exemptions in a timely way to reposition containers on land that probably hadn't been used or hadn't been used for container storage previously. So this was a way in which, again, partnerships were demonstrating the value in terms of the wake of a climate event in that instance. And then thirdly, I think for partnerships, for us that have really shown a powerful way of managing issues was recovery from COVID in our airports. So like the US, we experienced some chaos in our airports, luggage being lost. I'm sure many of you maybe were part of unfortunately experiencing that. Congestion in airports generally, chaos, a highly synchronized system. A lot of things go on in the background, passengers don't see, suddenly revealed themselves in a recovery period, particularly in Canada, where you had an increase in passenger volumes, 280% in about 3 months. So the systems that were in place before just could not handle that kind of increase. And so with the chaos, we did convene our largest carriers, our largest airports, our service providers like our border services, luggage handlers and so on. We don't operate anything. I'm a policy guy. But again, our power to convene and bring those players together twice weekly initially to talk about how are problems evolving within that airport ecosystem, and then who should do what to resolve those issues. And a number of data initiatives came out of that, which kind of pointed to the success of what we did there in helping get ourselves back into a place where we're synchronized and everybody was squarely focused on that traveler experience.
Yeah, I liked hearing about your use of digital twins to be able to look at that connection for passengers going from airport to ground transportation. I'm curious, though, for how many people are involved in that kind of effort. How did data sharing across partners work? We have really stringent laws, for example, here in California for being able to share data, and it has really been a barrier to being able to enhance the customer experience downstream. How did that work out?
Yeah, it's a great question. It was very tough. I think a couple of things were at play where perhaps as the federal regulator, we didn't realize the lack of data sharing that was happening beforehand. That there were lots of tension points between, for example, carriers sharing with airports. And there was a number of reasons for that. In one respect, carriers maybe didn't see airports as full partners in the efficiency game. Airports viewed themselves more as real estate agents, perhaps, than having that hand in helping on-time performance. Similar to our screeners, the screening service, feeling like their number one job was screening securely. It certainly is, right? But it also has an impact on efficiency in the airport. So if you have gigantic lines, people are missing their flights, that impacts the carrier and so on. So organizing folks so that you could actually say, we need data shared. It's got to be shared in a reliable way, in a format that is predictable, and not a fishing expedition for data, because that was a bit of a worry, but you get it's data with a purpose. So I need this set of data to do this thing. And then focused around a clear objective, again, that traveler experience and improving the on-time performance within the ecosystem. So it was actually revealing for me to kind of go through that experience, chairing that operational group, and realizing that the ecosystem had worked previous to that disruption fairly smoothly. But then once a disruption hit, to bring it under control, that data sharing was absolutely essential. And actually to get to deploying further technology within the system relied on more sophisticated data agreements to optimize the technology and optimize the capacity of airports going forward as well.
I just love that it's just a really smart application of technology, that even if the technology isn't necessarily novel, how it's applied for outcomes is interesting. Now, Carrie, you have not just new technologies coming together, but also a very bold approach coming together for Cucamonga Station. And I'm curious, with that mix of technologies and doing something that was just a really heavy lift, what barriers were experienced during that, and what have you learned from that experience so far?
So it might oversimplify it, but I often look at it as like a 1,000-piece puzzle or a 5,000-piece puzzle, depending on what the day is. So what we have happening at Cucamonga Station is the convergence of an existing Metrolink San Bernardino rail line that is not subordinate to freight. So infrastructure is really what is the constraint on how much service and our partnership with Metro as far as funding, how much we can run on that line. And then we have what's called the West Valley Connector. It's a bus rapid transit system, 19 miles long, travels into LA County again, and then back into San Bernardino County, connecting the Metrolink Riverside line with Cucamonga Station, and several entertainment and retail centers and work centers along that 19-mile corridor, as well as the Ontario International Airport. Then we have the high-speed rail line, Brightline, electrified line that's running for us between our San Bernardino Valley from Cucamonga Station to our high desert, which is a bedroom community. It's where our most affordable housing is. But there's a lot of folks commuting through the Cajon Pass every day to get down to the valley to get to those jobs. So we have all those converging at this 8-acre site that is currently a Metrolink station with 960 parking spaces. All the endeavors are on their own timeline, and many of the activities overlap. So we have spent the last better part of 2 years with a lot of really smart people and really dedicated people getting together, figuring out how do we parse out all this land to meet these needs. We also have, just 4 miles south of that location, we have Ontario International Airport, which is growing at an exponential rate. And we're very committed to looking at what their needs are ahead of time to make sure we don't create a congestion situation. We know they're going to continue to grow. They don't have constraints on their runway lengths, and they don't have constraints as far as hours due to residential, development surrounding them. So some of the barriers we have encountered have definitely been, we had to develop a level of trust with all our partners, because we had to have really difficult conversations about land decisions. Who's going to get in first, who's going to get what space. Those decisions have impacts on cost profiles of projects. We had to think about policy. Speaking of express lanes, for a long time, SBCTA has had a plan to build 2 express lanes through the Cajon Pass along the I-15 corridor in each direction. We had to have a very frank conversation with our board on if we do want Brightline to come, and we think it is the right decision, but we cannot accommodate 2 express lanes in each direction and Brightline in that I-15 corridor without just blowing up the whole footprint and making things extremely cost prohibitive. So our board had to make a policy decision about giving up that right away and going to 1 express lane each direction and allowing that footprint to come in. In order to do that, and Brightline was a great partner, we recognized that from that Victor Valley high desert area to Cucamonga Station, we had, hundreds of people driving a day to come and park at that station and get on Metrolink and travel to the west. So part of the decision was, and Brightline came to the table, is they would provide 3 round trips a day from a commuter station at the top of the Cajon Pass to serve those that were driving in the corridor, thus, in the future reducing congestion and hopefully balancing that use between rail line and express lanes. Another barrier is funding. So we're all used to funding as a big barrier. We are constrained, in how we can build out these multimodal hubs and these confluence of these multiple services. How do we afford to operate them all? So about 10 years ago, we started getting very serious on this front as we were building out our transit network. And so we first programmed the money needed for operation and maintenance. And we program it out several years in the future. And then we back out and say, okay, what do we have left for capital? And then what does our gap look like? So right now, West Valley Connector is under construction. That's moving along. I think most folks in the room know where Brightline's at. They have their $3 billion grant from the federal government, and they're working on their financing package for the rest of that project, and working with the Federal Railroad Administration on their grant agreements. But for the ONT Connector project, that's really where we're at. That's our biggest barrier at this point, is closing the funding gap on that project, and looking at the grant programs that the state of California has to offer to help us do that.
Thanks so much for that. I am really excited to see this play out as a use case, because it just seems like it has all of the perfect ingredients to be a value proposition for mode shift. And to the extreme extent you have to go to incentivize those kinds of choices. So I'll be really interested to see what kind of data you come back with in the future. And you mentioned federal funding, and it sounds like that was a really important partnership just to make this really come into fruition. Did you want to say anything else about that, making it kind of reality?
Yeah, I mean, we've had the election, right? So I think California is in a unique place where we'll have to see what it looks like under the current the next administration. But we'll just continue working at it. We'll continue developing the project and identifying the funding that we can to further close that gap. But ultimately, we will need to seek federal funding and have to use formula funding as well as grant funding to close that gap. It's extremely important.
Yeah, one change we've seen in federal funding is that instead of just doing these short pilots that kind of take years to do and then full deployment, which in my personal experience, I'm always worried we're solving for yesterday's problems when we take that long. But now we're seeing more grants for full-scale deployments, which is great because it does kind of kick the tires on scalability, but it also could really shorten the schedule on being able to actually deliver something valuable that customers are really wanting and needing. Andrew, I know that Caltrans received a grant for the Sustainable Mobility Wallet. Did I say that right? Thanks. And that was done in partnerships too, but could you talk a little bit about that and how when we talk about technology and putting something into these modal hubs that also consider fare payment, equity, other things across modes, what can be leveraged there with this deployment you have coming up?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think one of the things that's so important is defining the problem that you're trying to solve. and making sure you're not solving yesterday's problem. And over the last year, I think we've done a lot of work to really focus our perspective on the issue that in California, we have too many solo drivers, and that's something that's been identified by CARB in their scoping plan, and any number of different policy documents from a variety of state agencies and regional and local agencies as well. And so we want to shift people into multimodal transportation. It's great to hear SBCTA, making those choices at their level that we have only so many dollars to spend. So let's shift as many of those dollars as we can into that rail expansion. I know from personal experience at LA Metro in my previous career that building the infrastructure for a more multimodal California is going to take us decades. And I'm fully in support of it. We absolutely need high quality bus and rail service. But then the question really becomes, okay, so if we've identified that problem when it comes to the climate issue of having too many solo commuters, we also know that's a key contributor to the congestion issue, right? There are only so many highways and roads in California. And so having everyone driving their own vehicle makes that congestion problem worse. It also happens to be the most expensive form of transportation. So it's hard on low income and disadvantaged communities to participate in it. So with all of that in mind, we've really been doing a lot of thinking, building on the work that LA Metro and Oakland DOT has done on mobility wallets. So effectively paying people to use sustainable mobility options. And so we are, very excited to have received a grant very recently from Federal Highways, from their congestion relief program, to develop and implement a larger scale mobility wallet program in Los Angeles and San Diego. We think this is really a continuation of great work that Metro and Oakland have done. And we also think it's a precursor to future work. There's been a lot of interest since I started talking about this concept in the last few months across the state about the ability for a mobility wallet to help shift behavior on transportation from solo driving to multimodal. And so what this will do is create a financial account for users that they can use to pay for transportation. It'll also allow Metro and Sandag to provide financial incentives to the users who choose other forms of transportation besides driving alone. And then we're also going to incorporate dynamic carpooling services. So again, we've been learning a lot from folks in Europe who have been subsidizing carpooling, particularly in France, but also in a number of other countries. And they've been doing this for about 5 years, and it's been very successful in increasing the rates of carpooling in areas where multimodal transportation just isn't an option, right? It's a lower density land use. It's a more sprawling type of environment. And so carpooling is actually the most convenient and sustainable choice for people in those areas. And as we know in California, right, we have a lot of bedroom communities. We have a lot of suburban communities. Agencies across the state have done great work at really surveying those people about what they think about pricing and express lanes. And the number one thing that I would say I've heard and that they've heard is we get it. We get that it makes sense. You raise the cost of something, that means fewer people will do it. And I want more multimodal transportation, but it's not there today and it's not going to be there tomorrow. So what's my option? My option is to pay the toll. Even though I moved to this more affordable area to lower my cost of living, I do have that longer commute, but I'm willing to deal with it in time, not so much in dollars. So we see this as an opportunity to hopefully help address that concern. And because it's a technological implementation, it doesn't require new infrastructure. We're also hoping that could be fairly rapid. It might be something that we could actually deploy in time for the Olympics. And it could help manage traffic during the Olympics around the region and just keep Angelenos and everyone else down here moving smoothly and allowing the Olympic and Paralympic vehicles to get to and from their destinations as well.
Yeah, living in the express lane world for a long time, it's such an important counterbalance to disincentivize, and we've seen since the pandemic that the appetite to carpool is just, it's very sticky, and it's taking, we're doing customer outreach and surveys to say, well, will it take us to get you, out of your car today and really look at it on a per trip basis versus a person basis. And I'll share what we learned in San Mateo when we gave people a benefit to, and they could choose transit or tolling. They overwhelmingly chose transit. The rest of it was when there was not an option for them, either because of the time of day or the reduced service, to be able to what the transit agencies could do with their financial capabilities given ridership. And so that data has been really compelling. Is there any prediction you have on what data you may be looking at, or if there's going to be something you're going to use as a baseline to see if this is moving the needle?
Yeah, those are great questions. I mean, and on your intervention, one thing that I learned from that we want to incorporate here is really let the user choose, right? Let them choose whatever mode works best for them. If there's a rail service, there should be a subsidy or an incentive for taking that rail service. And so being very flexible and open, I think, is important. In terms of what we've seen in these current mobility wallet pilots and what we've seen in Europe, certainly we'll be looking to see if rates of any type of shared or sustainable mobility go up. I think that's going to be a key concern, and really by how much. I think beyond even the quantitative data, something that's emerged from LA Metro's mobility wallet pilots are just really great qualitative anecdotal data, stories of people saying, they've been able to use that mobility wallet to purchase an electric bike to get to and from work or to and from school. One of the things I also want to make sure we do is allow for that flexibility to be able to use something like an express lane when there is an emergency, because I think that's such an important consideration for a lot of folks.
Great, thank you for that. I wanted to give each of you an opportunity. All of you have had a lot of successes recently, big and small, and I wanted to give you an opportunity for thinking about and sharing where you feel like you've had a real gold star that would offer some lessons on successful outcomes. Ray, I'll start with you.
Well, sure. We've had a huge opening coming out of the pandemic. Everybody was really struggling. All of transit agencies struggling to bring customers back. And as one of the big openings of our system, the regional connector, which connected the Expo line, previously known as Expo line and previously known as the Blue line, to the L line through downtown, creating now a interconnected rail system of light rail, east-west now our E line, and north-south our A line. And that has dramatically helped the ridership in Los Angeles County. Connectivity is key. The frequency in that 5-station segment in downtown where all the lines meet is incredibly important and really attracts new riders to the system. And the information that is provided to our users of when the next train is going to arrive, how frequent it is, and when we have an issue with any new system, there are the kinks need to be fleshed out. So that has been a huge success for us. And looking forward, we just again are kind of looking to what we call the big project, the D line opening up all the way to the west side, is going to be phenomenal. We're going to need to be really ready to open that and provide customers information, because it's going to be right before, again, the game, so it's going to be huge.
Yeah, and we know that from the qualitative data on surveys that reliability and predictability and transparency into what may be happening in a system is so important for choice at the moment of when you're deciding to pull your car out of the driveway or not. Carrie, what do you have?
So I'm going to take the privilege of talking about two things. So just again, highlighting the transformation that's occurring at the Cucamonga station. This is such a visionary project for San Bernardino County. And if you look back to when our sales tax measure was passed in 2004, this was nowhere on the radar for our community. So we have made leaps and bounds in building out a strong transit network that will serve into the future, and bringing our partner together with Ontario International Airport and Brightline. It cannot be understated how important this is, and how many folks have come to the table to bring this together. But I do want to take a moment and talk about our zero emission multiple unit, because this is another really cool thing that we've done. We're big proponents of the Metrolink system. We think the San Bernardino line is key to our communities. And we really want to see it go zero emission. But we recognize that electrifying that full line was going to be a daunting task. And the last estimate I heard was $12 billion. And we have a hard enough time funding Metrolink year after year with 5 member agencies. So we decided to focus on the vehicle, and we took a multiple unit, which are used throughout Europe regularly for intercity rail, and we transformed it into a zero emission multiple unit just by looking at the power pack. And that power pack is a hydrogen battery generator, basically powering electric motors at the wheels. The vehicle's in San Bernardino County. It's going through dynamic testing on the corridor now. It just went through grade crossing validation. It also accomplished the world record for the longest running hydrogen rail vehicle in the world. It ran over 1,700 miles in 46 hours on one fill up of hydrogen. So
That's very cool. Andrew.
Yeah, I'll take a moment to highlight something that maybe isn't quite finished yet, so it might be a little premature for a full-on gold star, but also is something that I want to share with folks so that they can comment on it if they'd like. But our SB 743 VMT mitigation branch has released updated guidance in the last couple of weeks on the process for VMT mitigation under Senate Bill S 743, which was passed about 12 years ago. And for those of you who aren't in California and aren't intimately involved with highway and housing projects, SB 743 requires agencies to calculate and mitigate any additional vehicle miles traveled that their project will induce, and do this under CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act. And I mention this because I think it's very exciting for the department to have the second editions of these guidance documents now out for public review. It really helps enshrine how important VMT mitigation is to us and to really the state of California. I know it's a very controversial topic, and it's very frustrating to some, but I think we've had a lot of successes in that part of the department in working with agencies up and down the state in actually getting final environmental documents completed that have 100% VMT mitigation. And we have a number of draft environmental documents that are at 100% VMT mitigation as well. So I know it's a challenge. It increases project costs, but there are really solutions. And so just if you're interested in this, please do go online and comment on these documents. And also, feel free to reach out to me if you'd like to talk about it more. Happy to take comments and questions, and also organize meetings to help you prepare for VMT mitigation on a given project.
I think that's great. And 743 has been really sticky and difficult. It's just a natural tension, but I think that the counties especially will really welcome that guidance so they know what's in and out of bounds. But I think it will also let them get creative about what mitigation looks like and balance that with cost. So that's really cool. I hope.
Yeah, and just as one of those examples for SR 37, which is a road project up in the Bay Area. They're actually achieving the VMT mitigation just through tolling and HOV enforcement. So it's not they're not doing new investments or anything like that. They're just committing in the document that they'll keep single occupant vehicle driving down. So to your point, you can get really creative with different ideas.
Yeah. Silver Star. Yeah. Just kidding. Craig.
Yeah, I'll take the opportunity to talk about a couple of things. On the passenger side, I think it really is that air experience and the ecosystem working differently today than it did pre-pandemic. But the digital twin, to go back to that example, particularly at YVR, Vancouver Airport, where the use of data has allowed users, like accessibility users, to be at home and look at the model of the airport and make decisions about how they're going to experience their traveler journey and identify assistance they may need before they get to the airport. So they can do that from the comfort of their house before they leave, so they can get comfortable with the environment they're going to be entering into. It's innovations like that, I think, that have been a real success because we've had, again, a more deliberate focus on the user experience, and the data sharing has enabled that. The discussions between partners within the system have allowed that to happen. The other thing, I think, just within the passenger side of things, we're doing at Transport Canada's Right Touch initiative. So it's deploying technology to make the travel experience for the traveler, again, a little bit more seamless as they're passing through the various security points. So how many times you show your identity, papers be reduced, so there's not as many friction points in pulling out, what do I need this time? Do I need my ticket, or do I need my ticket and my ID? And then how many times you're showing that as you go from sort of curb to the doorway of the aircraft. And so trying to reduce that and make that more predictable for the user, but at the same time, build in secure aspects to the technology that will help us make that journey more secure and have better verification of the travelers that are passing through that process. So for us, it's a sort of a win-win. It's good for the user, but it's also better for us because we're deploying that technology, biometrics, and other things that help make that travel journey a little bit more secure. On the freight side, a real great sort of initiative that we've got underway where we're seeing some good results is around mapping the freight flows in Canada, again, using data, working with our provincial counterparts, working with shippers, working with railways, ports, having them all come together so we can identify friction points in cargo journey, and that just kind of helps with our reliability as a trading partner with our trading partners around the world. It also gets us all focused on what are the metrics that we're trying to put in place that proves that freight flows are becoming more efficient. And so, of course, with supply chain issues that you experienced in the US and we experienced similarly in Canada, and the threat of more frequent disruptions that we're experiencing from climate change or other things, that focus allows shippers then to better predict how their cargo will move and make those choices where the intermodal handoffs will happen for freight, from trucks to rail and then to marine. So opening up choices for shippers, I think, and increasing the visibility of the supply chain for shippers, I think is a shared priority. But of course, a supply chain is a very competitive construct. You've got a lot of competitors within the supply chain, speaking to the trust issues before, breaking down some of those silos that people understand what collective objective are we trying to achieve without eroding somebody's commercial position, I think is a tricky balance, and that's where the federal government can help play a role. But also I'd say just around the comments that have been made around the constrained financing that we're all facing at all levels of government, we do have to make the dollar go further. So technology is key to that, how we optimize existing capacity. So deciding with partners where you might best deploy technology, and making sure that the federal government, at least on our side, is not the one dictating the technology or pretending that we innovate. It's actually innovation happens in the private sector, but fostering the environment where innovation can happen so that dollars go further. And that digitization effort, I think, is one area where we're making some good progress, but more needs to be made, but we're quite excited about it.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, especially because in the private sector, it's really what is starting to set, well, has always, but has really amped up the expectation of the modern customer experience that's really been driven by the private sector and that innovation. And there's that same expectation if they're consuming transportation in some way, shape, or form, that that same sort of seamless technology interface and interplay with them, I think is just a benchmark that public agencies are really trying to keep up with and meet, but also really partner with the private sector in very different ways than we've seen in the past, like a traditional RFP. So I think that's really cool coming forward. Thank you guys for sharing that. I'm very excited to see all these come forward. And I want to open it up to Q&A for our panelists. If anyone has any, I can't see anything, so you're gonna have to like yell. I'm just gonna call on someone who doesn't have a question. I don't know if we have here's a mic for you.
Okay. One issue that's been back and top of my mind for many, many years is that one of our biggest assets is our HOV lane system. And especially in Southern California, we have very few freeways that do not have HOV lanes. The original purpose of HOV lanes obviously was to reduce the number of cars by having people pair up into vehicles. But that's not the way it's been implemented for many, many years. As we know, there's probably enough latent capacity in multi-person vehicles already to jam up the HOV system. And our HOV system is pretty much not providing the advantage that it was supposed to provide originally, except for maybe on the shoulders of the peak period sometimes. Originally maybe it was not feasible due to technology, but now with technology it's pretty feasible to probably regulate HOV lanes better. My question is whether any of the agencies have ever thought of this to, just like we have licensed the EVs, for example, to use HOV lanes, to regulate the HOV lanes in a way that only registered or licensed carpoolers that are generally reducing traffic, reducing cars, can use it and use that big asset that we have with the HOV lanes for licensed, registered HOVs and transit. So if that's clear enough, I'd like to see, I don't know whether that's a question to Ray or maybe to Andrew, or I didn't want to put anybody on the spot.
Yeah, I think there's probably a lot of good experience with that here.
Been on my mind for many, many years.
Yeah, sure. No, and yeah, we know they're underperforming. We have public reports. The technical term is degraded. The HOV lanes have not. Have not fulfilled their promise or their function, and so this is something that we are thinking about a lot. There are obviously two things. So first, talking about technology, the technology around enforcement has really changed over the last 5 years. And I think this is a good example of how technology change can happen faster than public policy or legal or implementation change. And so there's great examples, even here in California, where AI-enabled cameras are enforcing, in this case, hot lanes. But the same technology could obviously be used to enforce an HOV lane. So that's something we're thinking about. The other mechanism would honestly be just tolling the lanes for the vehicles, the single occupant vehicles, and then enforcing fines and penalties or what have you for anyone who would misrepresent themselves as a carpool, and then offering discounts to carpoolers. But yeah, that's a very important topic right now at the state level.
I would agree. In some of our current studies, some on the 605, on the 405, we're looking at technologies expanding HOV, expanding HOT. And in terms of technology and enforcement, even on our bus rapid transit systems on local streets, we're looking at AI to help us enforce when an auto jumps in a bus-only lane. So we're looking at all that technology as well.
But what about formalizing HOV users as opposed to just a couple of family members, right?
I mean, I think you're asking So we do have van pools, like registered van pools, so there is that. I think where the struggle could potentially be, and feel free to weigh in here, is that when we think about a vehicle taking multiple trips, not all those trips may be HOV. And so if we're moving a vehicle that's going to pick up people, should they be allowed to use the HOV lane just because they're a registered van pool when they don't actually have that many occupants? So I think the occupancy detection piece is where a lot of technology's looking towards. Georgia, CERTA just released their Peach Pass Verify app, which is passed all the security, privacy, and equity tests to be able to detect and validate HOV. And I think that's kind of the first step, because California is not alone. Nationwide, we're seeing the cheaters, the misdeclared HOVs, whatever, not trigger word I can use, that are, the scufflaws of 20 to 30%. And some agencies care about that revenue, but most agencies really care about the fairness factor, that they're not fully serving their good paying customers. And so I think it's a very hot topic right now, and we're seeing a lot of technical innovation to try and solve it. But I don't know if it's really around registering carpools. Is that? Feel free to disagree.
No, I think that's right. I mean, I think it would be there'd be some sort of self registration through an app or something like that for a given trip, more than anything else.
Other questions? Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
One, two. Okay. This might be a controversial question, but it's been on the back of my mind for the longest time. Kudos to San Bernardino County. I reside in Fontana, and I'm glad that it's going to be, like, I guess, the starting point for high-speed rail here in the country, right?
Yes.
And, many applause to that, and I hope to ride that one day. But why is high-speed rail so controversial in this country? Why is it such a division point for people? Why don't we have that in our country? Like, there are countries all around the world, in Europe and Asia, that already have these services, and we're so way behind. Like, can someone, like, tell me why our connectivity here, especially in SoCal, is so bad? Like, just to get from one place to another takes forever driving. But even then, if you don't have a car and you need to use public transportation, it could take 2 to 3 hours to get from one place to another. I think it's ridiculous. Can somebody help me with that? Thank you.
So,
Carrie, do you want to crack?
I'll start because I feel you. No, I think you're spot on. I think that comparing us to some of the other countries is very difficult. They're smaller, they're more compact. They did not get on board with the car culture that we did, especially in California and Southern California. So yes, we should aspire to many of the things we see there, but we need to recognize where we've been and where we're coming from. I think we're on the verge of a really good renaissance when it comes to this. I think rail versus high-speed rail, take either one. It's really important that we recognize the value of, like, Metrolink in Southern California, but it's really only 2 lines. It's the San Bernardino line and the Antelope Valley line that are independent of freight. And freight is a major component of how our economy works in this state and in Southern California. So Metro's done great things on the Antelope Valley line. They're working hard to get even more service out there. We're doing the same in partnership with Metro on the San Bernardino line. So I think the focus should be on how do we get more frequent, more reliable service in Southern California for rail, and not tie it up with high-speed rail so much. I mean, California high-speed rail is a big project. It's got a lot tied to it, right? But if you're talking strictly Southern California, let's leverage the resources and the assets that we have and make them perform as well as they can within our available resources. And I think we're seeing that. If you look back at the history of Metrolink, it was a grand plan. The state funded it through proposition funding to purchase and get these rail rights to all these freight lines within Southern California. And that decision's just, it's paid dividends. And while it hit a little bit of a challenge with COVID, when, and we're still kind of working our way out of that as we have more people that are fortunate enough to telework, right? It's really pretty phenomenal that we do have, I think it's 540 something miles at this point. They just did a schedule optimization that reduced some of the travel times by like 95% for connecting lines. So yes, I hear the frustration, and I'm right there with you. But I think we're headed in a good place. And Brightline, I mean, it's a privately sponsored endeavor, right? It's a very big, expensive project crossing state lines, and they're well suited to do it. And it's coming, so that piece will come.
I appreciate the conversation, and I so wish we had time for more questions, but CoMotion has been fantastic about keeping everyone on schedule. So I would like to, again, thank my panelists. Thank you for being with us this afternoon. And any other questions, feel free to come find us.